So now the plan to make this all work is to make my own pieces of frame. I'm making some kick-ups here, those round pieces in the back. Now to pick up from where I left off last night, working late into the hours, camera died, no more power anyways. You guys saw me putting together the frame rails. I put everything together, I welded it nice and tight, grinded down the welds with the flap disc. Grinded all of my welds down with the flap disc, and then that way it looks like a piece of frame. Check it out. Next issue I have to deal with here is to make sure that both those frame rails, both those kick-ups are perfectly next to each other. You want them to be perfectly aligned side by side, all the measurements the exact same, in the exact same position, so when you get it into your frame, you're not going to have a problem with one being higher or lower than the other one. You want this whole back section to be squared off so you can accurately measure where it's going to sit in the frame. So to do that, I use some old tempo piping that I had lying around because I have terrible luck with tempos and I usually break one a year and end up with a load of scrap piping that I had nothing to do with. So here I took the piping, although it's very different gauge and it was tricky to weld, it was good enough to hold everything square, hold it all together, hold it where I needed it to be so that I can mount it into the chassis. Now for the part that's kind of scary, I gotta chop the frame out. The stock frame on that Elcamino has gotta go. Make room for the new pieces that I'm making. So I'm just gonna cut it out and cut everything out of my way so I can get in there and I can weld and I can work and everything is gonna work fine. So everything's looking good. I got these pieces all welded together. They're sitting side by side. They're perfect angles. They're perfectly square to each other. They're perfectly in line. So the next big step I have to do was the part that I wasn't looking forward to because it gets kind of scary, but basically I have to chop this Elcamino in half. I'm cutting the frame off right behind the cab where the driver sits, a couple inches to give me some room to play, some meat to work with. But basically we're cutting the car in half and the whole back half of this car has got to go. The new frame piece is in. There's going to be a lot of molding, a lot of bracing, and a lot of work to get it to fit properly, but I'm going to show you guys what's up. So, if you can see anything in here, they fit pretty good, but I've got to shorten this, I've got to get rid of these, I've got to clean everything up, make a good surface to weld to, I've got to cut these down a little bit, and the idea is, you can see here, this is the new piece of frame, comes down like this, it's going to go off that way, this one's going to go off that way. So everything lines up, nice fit, nice snug, and we'll get the whole thing all bolted together. Now what I'm thinking right now, weld the frame onto the truck, and then we'll bring the differential in, raise it up, get it in place, and make the mounts for it. See what happens. So after some cutting and some massaging of the metal, it was time to get this chassis to sit in there. Now the plates, the way they were cut, they sit inside the chassis, which gives me both a little bit extra rigidity and also that it sits nicely when I'm trying to mock it up, so that it'll sit in the frame, and in the back half I can adjust the height and left to right to make sure it all lines up straight, make sure it's leveled, flat, squared, and carry on. Now in order to make everything sit on here properly and strong, I'm gonna have to make some more plates to fill in the gaps of where the frame rails meet the new part of the frame, the new kick-ups, and I have to measure that pretty accurately. So I figured the best way to do it would be to take the cardboard again, because like I said before, that's easy to cut, it's easy to manage with, it takes very little time, and if you screw up, well, it's not a big deal because it's 30 seconds and some cardboard and a pair of scissors. So I took these pieces, found out exactly the sizes that I need to make the frame mold together, and then traced all that out onto the sheet metal, cutting it with the grinding wheel, making sure my lines are straight, all my numbers and measurements are exact. Now that the frame is all basically mostly welded in, everything is coming together nicely. It's starting to be strong, it's starting to be solid, it's starting to come together and look like something. It welded good where everything was prepped properly, but the last minute things where I had to add a little bit here, take off a little bit there, those got a little bit messy. So this part was definitely a pain in the ass, but if you stay steady, stay cool, stay calm, stay focused, and just keep trucking through it, we're gonna get this frame welded on nice and solid, no questions asked. Now, for the third time, the third attempt of putting this rear end back in the car. Was able to take the jack and put the differential into place, start doing my measurements all over again, because now I have nowhere to go from, because before I had the other tabs on the other frame, gave me a marking point, something to go from. I had my distance all measured out, but now it's a completely new rear end, it's completely new kick-ups, there's no marks, there's no measurements. I have to start from square one and make sure it's squared off with the body, with the chassis, everything is in its spot, the right height, the right pitch, the right angles, and we go from there. So that puts me right back in again with this piece of sheet metal, grinding everything, little brackets, making stuff out of cardboard. So I had to repeat the whole process that I did initially at the very beginning of this that you guys saw, with making the cardboard brackets to fit the proper size, making sure they fit in there, marking them off, smoothing them out, drill the holes in the appropriate spots, and use all that with the sheet metal, weld it together, make new tabs. I'm talking for nothing now because you guys have already seen this. If not, go back to a previous episode and check it out. So now that it's time to put this differential in and get it all lined up, the only thing I'm missing now is that front bracket that I had to cut into the original cross member of the frame. Now that's all gone, so basically I've got to make my own, starting from scratch. I've got to figure something else out. So the easiest thing I could do right now, just to mock it up and make it sit proper, was get another piece of that tempo piping. Since it fit so well in between the rails the first time, I figured this time we'll just use it the same way, cut it to fit, tack it in, and then make a bracket that's gonna hold the front of the diff and give it a bit of clearance so that I can still move it up and down and get roughly 5 degrees each way of pitch for my differential to meet up drive shaft, transmission, that whole linkage. It's got to be set in a certain way, so I have to make sure that it's adjustable, whatever I need to be doing next, later on, whatever. You want it to be adjustable so you don't have to chop it up and cut it out, and that way if you do any changes in the motor compartment and everything's set up, like right now for example, it's running stock oil pan from the motor that it came with. It's an F-body pan actually, and one day I would like to go do dry sump, so that would change the pitch of my motor and transmission, because I could drop the front of the engine down a little bit lower and get more clearance with the dry sump system, because the oil pan's only about that big. So keep that in mind for future. You want to make sure that you can move stuff around a little bit and have it adjustable so that you're not backed into a corner and you're not stuck in a dead end. To make all the bracketry and everything that was going to go off this pipe to set up the front of the differential is no different from everything I did already before. Find a piece of sheet metal the proper size, trim it, cut it, make it fit the way I need. Had to drill some holes to be able to bolt it onto the differential. There's 2 bolts in the front that are very long and go all the way through. That's where you get a lot of your pitch adjustment. So I use that bracket point, that mounting point, put some holes in it, put the plate back in the vise and bent it up to the proper angle, which will meet the pipe that crosses between the two frame rails, holds the bracket to the diff. For the differential is done. The only thing left is doing ladder bars. Now I'm a little worried about this part, and I think it's going to be kind of challenging, but I made appropriate brackets, drilled the holes where I needed to match, and this is another instance where I wanted to make adjustable. So I made some spacers to put it in between the brackets and where they sit, so that if I need to move them forward, I could take those brackets out, and it gives me a couple millimeters, if you will, to play with it back and forth. That way, if right now when it's all welded up and I've got too much weird toe out and stuff in the rear, well, I can bring those forward, or if the axle doesn't sit properly, I can bring it forward a couple millimeters, and that would help with my alignment adjustments and getting everything lined up straight and true. Worst case scenario, I can always cut these off later because they're on the outside of the frame and it's not a big thing to get to. It's not too tough. It's pretty much right there. You take off the wheel and it's right in your face. So to get that mounted properly, I made my brackets, tacked them in. I'm gonna have to beef this up later a little bit, but right now, the ladder bars, everything bolts together. It all fits in properly. It's measured to be the exact same on both sides. So right now, structurally, this thing is all done. It's gonna sit. I can get an idea now how it's gonna look, how it's gonna run. I put the wheels back on it and dropped it back on the ground. Immediately hopping into the box to simulate some weight on it, jumping on the rear differential to make the whole suspension function, work, move, articulate, and it's good. I can bring it right down, I can put all my weight on it, I can make the springs work, and when it goes to bottom out, every bracket that I had an issue with before is now perfectly fine. Everything sits on the outside of the new frame that I built, so when it compresses, it clears the brake calipers, it clears the swing arm brackets, the mounting points for the ladder bars work, everything is lined up, everything's functioning. I have finally completed the first phase of this Elcamino build. This turned into much more work than I thought. Because when you start planning out a project like this, it's fun. You're thinking, you're brainstorming all these ways you're gonna do it, and you watch stuff on YouTube, on TV, and through the magic of editing, like you guys see here, everything goes fast and quick. So in your mind, it's easy to think that you're gonna get into a project like this and everything's gonna be smooth and everything's gonna be cool and it's all gonna go your way, but that is definitely not the fact. You gotta kind of mentally prepare to be stumped, to have some sort of roadblocks in your way. But just remember, that's all part of the challenge, that's all part of the game. If you can't get through the little things, you don't deserve the big things. So this is one that I'm definitely not gonna give up on. So now, phase one is complete. One of the biggest parts of this project, because it's something I have never done before, was swapping a C4 Corvette suspension onto a 1971 Elcamino chassis. I'm not dressing up a Corvette chassis to look like an Elcamino, I'm making an Elcamino function like a Corvette. With the car back on the ground, we have a good idea how it looks, how it sits, what it's gonna be doing when it's all together, and now phase one is complete. So nothing left but to enjoy this moment and then start planning out the next phase, which is gonna be putting in the motor and transmission. It's gonna be an interesting feat because that as well, I wanna make it function just like the Corvette, therefore moving the engine and transmission back several inches. I'm talking 8 to 10 inches to make it sit behind the front subframe and make as good balance as I can, because don't forget, this is a Chevy Elcamino. Basically, it's a car and a truck. It's got all the good parts of a car and the good parts of a truck. And one of the bad parts of a truck is that the backs are always super light. So the balance point on this thing, stock, was not good at all. We're gonna see if we can change that in the next episode. Stay tuned, baby.